All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm Christina Colon, your task force co-chair. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we begin, I do want to express our continued concern for the health and safety of you, your family, friends, and communities. We know that your priorities and schedules have been shifting regularly, so we do greatly appreciate your continued participation in this process. As you may have noticed, we are now calling these virtual meetings rather than webinars. The goal is to not just give information out to you, but also provide an opportunity for the task force members to have an engaging conversation about the material that is presented. I also want to take this opportunity to welcome a new official task force member, Eric Anderson with Enterprise Florida. Eric is taking over for Tim Vanderhoof. Eric is no stranger to MCORS as he previously served as an alternate for our task force at our February 12th meeting. He was also already serving on the Southwest Central Florida Task Force and will now serve on all three task forces. So today we'll share brief updates on the technical analysis and the framework for developing task force recommendations. Our time today will be spent discussing needs, guiding principles, and instructions for project development and beyond. I want to emphasize that we are in an early planning phase. The guiding principles that will be developed by this task force team will provide instructions for the department as we move into the initial development phase of the project. We touched on various guiding principles throughout this task force process. Most recently, we discussed broadband earlier this month. Today, we will do the same for a few other topics and start looking at the comprehensive list of high-level needs. Your thoughts and innovative ideas shared at previous meetings have generated a lot of meaningful conversation, and now it's time for us to work together to synthesize that information to fulfill our commitment of delivering the task force report to the governor and legislature by November of this year. We appreciate the increased engagement from members of the public. The webinars hosted in April, May, and early June generated participation from 2,393 attendees, with 163 people providing public comment to the task forces. These webinars, as well as today's virtual meeting, have provided an opportunity for public participation to exceed what we experienced during the in-person task force meetings. I also want to thank the many members of the public who provided their comments via email, letters, and other formats. Public comment during our in-person and virtual meetings is only one way for the public to provide their input. Public comments may be submitted at any time to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us and will become part of the public record. We will compile and share all public comments received since February at our next meeting in July. We hope to return to a regular meeting schedule in July. We have set the date of July 22nd for that meeting. These will be different from what we experienced in person last fall and winter, and also different from our virtual webinars and meetings over the past few months. We are developing options for a hybrid format that will allow some members of the task force and public to be in a central location while others participate virtually or remotely. We will share more details soon, but please be assured at all times our approach to meetings will abide by the governor's executive order for the safe, smart, step-by-step plan for Florida's recovery, abide by government in the sunshine and all applicable public meeting rules, respect your level of comfort and your organization's guidelines and in-person gatherings, Most importantly, provide for a meeting format that maximizes the ability of all task force members to engage in discussion and develop consensus, as well as for the public to participate in and provide comments during the process. Now I will ask our facilitator, Christine Kiefover, to make a few announcements.
Thank you, Christina. So here it is. It's great that we're able to meet again in this virtual manner. As you can see, we're turning on our webcams to begin to be more comprehensive in our communication with you. So today's agenda will have some presentations and a lot more engagement amongst task force members. That's why we've checked your audio, and we'll be using the hand raise again during this meeting. This is all leading up to our next meeting, July 22nd at the Ocala Hilton that Christina just shared, where we will invite task force members to be part of the meeting, either personally or virtually from your own webcam. I'm going to go over a few areas that we're going to cover today. The public comment period will be at the end of the meeting, the logistics for our virtual meeting, and rules of engagement, today's objectives and agenda, and a brief Florida Sunshine reminder. Sorry. So the public comment period begins at 11:30 this morning, or as soon as we're done with task force member discussion. We've enhanced our approach to this meeting with public comment period to be more in line with an in-person meeting. And requests to comment may be made up until 11 o'clock this morning and will be addressed during the public comment period in the order in which they were received. For members of the public, if you've not yet registered and you'd like to provide a public comment, if you wish to do so, please sign up on the website today before 11, and I'll around 10:30 or so give a reminder for that to happen. If you need a link emailed to you, please use the raised hand function, and one of our team members will be able to provide that to you. At that time, when your name is called, we will unmute your line for you to provide comments within the allotted 3 minutes. Only one person at a time will be unmuted, and if you have self-muted, please be sure to unmute before speaking. If you did not submit your request in time to be able to speak today, please email your comments to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us. All right, so the virtual meeting is being recorded and will be available with our other materials on the MCOR's website. Task force members, you will remain muted for our presentations. And once we get into the task force member discussion, we'll shift to a more interactive mode. So please make sure that you're aware when we mute and unmute that everyone can hear what's going on. Similar to previous webinars, our discussion today will be a little bit more like our in-person meetings. Instead of putting up your tent cards like we do in person, to indicate that you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, you can use the hand raise feature. We ask that you remain self-muted when you're not speaking to reduce the background noise. I generally will recognize people in the order in which they raise their hand, although as we do in in-person meetings, I may manage the flow at times to allow members who have not yet had an opportunity to make a comment or speak, or to wrap up one thread of conversation before we begin another. If you've self-muted, please be sure to unmute before speaking. And a quick reminder, please don't put the virtual meeting on hold or take another call. We just may hear your hold music. And one last note, we may have adjusted your name to readily identify you as a task force member for when we need to unmute your line. Please do not make any changes to your username so that may be heard during roll call and the question and answer period. All right, so today's objectives. We want to receive an update on the task force work plan and recommendations framework. We will go through that. Receive an update on the avoidance and attraction layers that we've been talking about at each meeting. refine our high-level needs and guiding principles, and identify potential instructions for project development and beyond. And as always, receive public comment. So here's our agenda for today. I'll run through a refresher on government in the sunshine. Then I'll call out roll call. We'll then have a presentation from Wei Shen. She's DOT's chief planner on the draft framework for task force recommendations, followed by a presentation from Billy Burke on the avoidance and attraction area. And then we will move into a discussion as a group about high-level needs, followed by a discussion on selected guiding principles. We'll then briefly touch base on next steps and turn to public comment. The public comment period is scheduled to begin at 11:30 this morning, or as soon as the agenda items are completed. And today it's expected to be about 30 minutes of public comment, so we hope all the task force members will be able to stay online with us. All right, today we have a short reminder of government and sunshine requirements as we do at every one of our meetings. So generally speaking, task force members should not communicate verbally, through email, or via a third party to another task force member on items under consideration by the task force. You may communicate on matters unrelated to task force topics. So Diane from our Office of the Attorney General is on the virtual meeting this morning as well, and she can answer any questions regarding the Sunshine Law as it relates to the task force when we get to question and answer part of the agenda. Her contact information is here if you have any questions between our meetings. Thank you, Diane, for joining us today. All right, so on to the roll call. I have tried to take note of our task force members as they logged on, and we'll continue to do that through the meeting in case anyone's a little bit late. I'm now going to read through your names and organizations and note who is present and who's not in attendance. If by chance you're a substitute and we didn't recognize your attendance, please send an email to Jennifer. So we have Christina Colon from the Florida Department of Transportation. We have James Stansberry, who will come in and step in with Mario Rubio. He's a few minutes late, but I'll make sure we comment on that when he does join. Chris Wynn with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Mark Futrell with the Florida Public Service Commission. Eric Anderson, thank you for joining us from Florida Enterprise Florida. Jeff Kennard from the Hernando Citrus MPO. Scott Coons with the North Central Florida Regional Planning Council is here. Charles Lee from Audubon, Florida. Kent Wimmer from Defenders of Wildlife. Scott Carnahan from the Citrus County Commission. James Mayer from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Nancy Brown is here from the Florida Department of Education. Mike Napier is here from the Florida Department of Health. Matt Cernsey is not here as of yet when I took attendance with the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Jim Patton is here representing the Department of Business and Professional Regulations. Rusty Skinner is not here from CareerSource Florida. Kathy Bryant is not here from Marion County Commission. Warren Zwanka is here from the Swanee River Water Management District. Jeanette Seacrest is here representing the Southwest Florida Water Management District. Jeff Prather was not here when I was taking attendance a moment ago from the St. Johns River Water Management District. Mike Woods is here representing the Lake Sumter Metropolitan Planning Organization. Valerie Hancher is here with the Ocala-Marion County Transportation Planning Organization. Rock Meeks is not here from the Levy County Commission. Sean Sullivan is here representing the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. Bradley Arnold is here with Sumter County. Philip Fulmer is here from the Florida Trucking Association. Chris Saliba is here from the Florida Rural Water Association. Bill Ferry is present with the Florida Internet and Television Association. Danielle Ruiz is expected with the Florida Department of Economic Development Council. She was not here when I took attendance, and I'll double back on that. Kurt Williams is here with the Florida Farm Bureau Federation. Dr. Lauder is here with the College of Central Florida. Dr. Sider is here with the Lake Sumter State College. Paul Owens is here with Thousand Friends of Florida. Jason Lauritsen is here with the Florida Wildlife Corridor. Zachary Pruzak is here with the Nature Conservancy. Hugh Harling has joined us with the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council. And Katie Chernusco is not here, and she represents Volunteer Florida. Thank you all for those who have joined. All right, so thank you all. Now I'm going to hand it over to Wei Wei, who's going to go through the draft framework for the task force recommendations. Wei Wei.
Thank you, Christine. Good morning. I wanted to take a few minutes to set the stage for today's virtual meeting and for your next few meetings by summarizing the proposed framework for your recommendations and the final report. Will Watts, FDOT Chief Engineer, is available to answer questions today as well. The left part of this slide lists the 6 statutory purposes for MCORS. We're using these as a starting point, so all your recommendations tie back to at least one of these 6 purposes. As you look at this list, what jumps out is that most of the language is not specifically about transportation. It's about communities, the economy, the environment, and other related topics. The statute directs all of us to think about the types of communities we want in the future, and then to consider how transportation corridors can support that vision. This broad framework contemplated by the legislature allows your recommendations to be about more than just how FDOT plans a specific corridor. You also could be providing recommendations about the types of conservation, land use, community development, or economic development strategies that would support a transportation corridor in addressing these purposes. This slide recaps the statutory objective for MCORS, which is a specific charge to FDOT to advance construction of corridor projects. The statute specifically sets the vision of a multimodal, multi-use corridor and provides specific capabilities for FDOT to deploy innovative approaches to right-of-way acquisition and other tools to advance this vision. So as you consider your recommendations, there are 2 related questions before you. First, how can a program of multi-use, multimodal corridor investments support the broad statutory purposes in this study area? Second, how should key partners work together to address these statutory purposes? FDOT, along with other state agencies, local governments, MPOs and RPCs, and other partners. You've seen this slide before. This is the recommendations framework to address the statutory requirements. The statute describes the responsibilities of the task force, which essentially are to provide consensus recommendations in the 3 areas. The high-level needs for a corridor in the study area. That answers the question, why? Guiding principles for planning and developing a corridor. That tells us the how. And then instructions for FDOT and other partners to carry out the task force's recommendations in project development and beyond. What's next? At each step of this process, the intent is to support your recommendations with data and ensure there is an explicit handoff to what comes next in terms of planning, project development, design, and future steps. We introduced this framework at the first webinar in April. Let's take a few minutes to walk through each step using some examples. High-level needs essentially refer to the regional opportunities and challenges the corridor is intended to address. The needs are informed by the 6 categories of purpose and the 13 areas of benefit listed in the statute, as well as task force and public input. They're intended to be short statements of text supported by data and easily communicated with partners and the public. We are identifying high-level needs early in the process to make sure all subsequent activities tie back to the fundamental questions of how a corridor addresses the unique opportunities and challenges in this study area and the broad statutory purposes. As the process moves along, we will be able to get more specific in terms of developing evaluation criteria to determine to what extent the recommended needs are met by the corridor. The high-level needs language you develop eventually will become the basis for a more formal purpose and need in the project development and environmental process. Those of you familiar with the state PD&E process or the federal NEPA process know that the formal purpose and need often is a detailed chapter with lots of supporting information. We're headed there eventually, but we don't have the specific level of details yet. The statute reads that each task force should evaluate the need. Based on where we are in the process today, the evaluation you're able to do in terms of these needs generally is to look at available data and forecasts and provide your recommendations on how to define needs and your instructions on how to assess whether these needs are met in future planning and project development. I know that many of you would like to have more specifics now on future traffic or land use impacts. Because we're still at such a high level, it is difficult to pin those numbers down. But we do believe that establishing the right foundation today will guide the process moving forward. These are examples of some of the types of high-level needs that you might identify for the study area. And you'll have some time today to look at a specific list in a few minutes. Once the high-level needs are described, we will turn to guiding principles. The guiding principles are core values that guide decision about the corridor. They're the how we develop a corridor to address the needs. They generally are short statements supported by technical notes where needed. The guiding principles help identify avoidance and attraction areas and evaluate and narrow potential corridor paths course. They also will guide decisions about corridor location, design, mitigation, and other commitments long after your report is submitted. So far, we have looked at guiding principles in 4 categories based on the type of resources they address: natural, cultural, social, and physical. We may still use this organization where needed, but we also want to start tying the guiding principles more specifically to the needs they address. So returning to one of the needs from 2 slides ago, here's one of the potential guiding principles you discussed earlier as a task force to ensure the corridor addresses the identified needs. The third step in this process is the instructions for project development and beyond. It's not enough just to recommend why and how. We also need to specify what's next. We've talked many times about the Wekiva Task Force report. A lot of the impact of this report came from the 18 guiding principles it included, 10 on corridor location, and 8 on corridor design. Most of these principles were short. For example, does not encourage or promote additional development from already approved land uses. Include the maximum provision for bridging through strategically important wetlands. These guiding principles carry weight because they were specific. They provided instructions through related documents to project development, and they were monitored over time. The instructions are how we make the connection from the guiding principles back to what FDOT or specific partners will do next. This could mean addressing corridor location, such as the input you had already provided on areas of a corridor that should be avoided or areas that should attract a corridor. It also could mean identifying existing facilities that could be enhanced or might be opportunity for co-location. It also could mean identifying connectivity gaps that may need to be addressed through a new corridor in some parts of the study area. The instructions also could go beyond those specific location decisions to note implementation strategies that should be carried forward, refined, and implemented during planning, project development, design, and other activities. For example, you might give general instructions about consistency with local land use plans today, recognizing that details will be worked out over time as we move from a task course to a more specific alignment. Or you might, as the Wekiva Task Force did, make general statements about creating wildlife crossings or bridging wetlands, recognizing that the locations for where that happens will get detailed over time. Ultimately, the instructions communicate the intent of the task force in applying the guiding principles. This is where we also can document some of the issues that may not be fully resolved when the report is adopted, or what you want to flag as needing more attention moving forward. So let's go back to our example one more time. Based on the high-level needs and guiding principles, we've discussed here some of the specific instructions for project development and beyond that could be developed moving forward. Let's tie everything together. Eventually, your recommendations will address all 6 purposes in statute, and you will produce recommendations on high-level needs, guiding principles, and instructions related to all these topics. During your meetings to date, we've made great progress in laying the foundation to develop these recommendations. The task force has spent a lot of time learning about the study area, reviewing trends and conditions, reviewing local government comprehensive plans, hearing from subject matter experts on topics like the environment, economic development, workforce, technology, and broadband. You also have heard from the public at every meeting. The task force has also helped review many data layers and identify potential avoidance and attraction areas so that you have information to support your recommendations. You have reviewed and provided guidance on existing facilities that could be opportunities for enhancement or co-location. And you've started a working list of high-level needs, guiding principles, and instructions that has been refined over time. Today, we will start building out this framework by row. We will take a few examples and work through left to right to define our high-level needs, guiding principles, and instructions. This is how we addressed broadband at the last meeting. We'll work through a few more topics today. These are intended as examples to help us make progress. We'll take a more comprehensive view at the next few meetings. We also will start working through this framework by column. Today, we'll spend some time looking at the high-level needs as a set to see if we have comprehensively addressed all of them. Our hope is that between today and our next meeting in July, we can reach consensus on the high-level needs. We'll focus during meetings 6 through 8 on wrapping up the guiding principles and documenting the instructions so that you're close to a final report. Note that for each of these columns, we'll bring you a draft at one meeting, get your feedback, and then bring a revised draft at the subsequent meeting. As you can see, the schedule is aggressive. Now we're at that critical point where we need to roll up our sleeves, sharpen our pencils, and turn our thoughts into a consensus-driven report. Before I wrap up, let me briefly describe our thinking on the task force report. We anticipate the final report maybe 10 to 15 pages in its main body, consistent with the length of other recent task force reports, with supporting documentation placed in appendices or on the program website. The first 3 sections will summarize the background of the legislation, the task force membership and process, including public and agency involvement, and the study area characteristics. Staff will start drafting these sections for you to review. The 4th section is the heart of the report, your recommendation on high-level needs, principles, and instructions. We'll work on this together over the next few meetings. This section will focus on your specific recommendations with supporting narrative, including documenting significant concerns that are not resolved and would need to be addressed moving forward. The final section will be an action plan. This is what the task force recommends in terms of future planning and project development, as well as ongoing partner coordination, including the role of organizations on this task force in future activities and monitoring these recommendations. This report outline would not include specific recommendations on an alignment or project because we're still early in the planning process. But it would include clear guidance for how these decisions should be made. We'll bring a more specific outline to your next meeting in July for discussion. We want to share this today to give you a sense of where we're headed, and also to remind you that the goal is for consensus on the final report as a package. I know this will be challenging since getting to consensus is not easy. It will require back and forth discussions, trade-offs, and concessions. It's going to be an iterative process, and we all need to focus on the critical tasks ahead of us. Christine, I'll turn it back to you to see if we have any questions from task force members.
Great. Thank you so much, Wei Wei. Before we get into that, I do want to make sure that we recognize we've had a couple additional task force members join us. So if they want to ask questions, we've recognized those. James Stansberry is indeed on now for the Florida Department of Economic Development. Commissioner Bryant from Marion County has joined us, so thank you. Danielle Ruiz is representing the Florida Economic Development Council. Thank you for being with us. And Janice Unger is stepping in for Jeff Prather today for the St. Johns River Water Management District. So thank you all. All right, so Wei Wei just provided a great deal of detail, kind of laying out our work plan moving into the future. Do we have any questions of the task force members right now? This is where we're going to open it up, and raise your hand if you have a question, if you'd like any clarification of what Wei Wei just provided, or if you have a question moving forward. I don't see any raised hands, Wei Wei, so you were quite thorough in that presentation, so thank you so much. We're going to be using this open mic and hand raise throughout the day today, so this morning, so please, we encourage you to engage if you have questions along the way. Looks like we have, oh, hands are going up. Sorry. All right, so we do. Paul, wait, I think you got to come back on the there you go. All right, Paul Owens, you have a question of Wei on process.
Yeah,
I've unmuted you, Paul.
Hi,
There you go.
Thank you. Hi, Christina. Hi, Wei. Wei, you mentioned that the WCIVA recommendations, there were 18 specific recommendations and they carried weight and were monitored over time. Do you think they also carried weight because they were codified in statute? So there was a statutory obligation for the department to comply with the recommendations. And I'm wondering if maybe we want to do the same thing with our recommendations.
I think, Paul, you're absolutely right. The department, these recommendations, they carried weight because they are pretty specific and they offered instructions for moving forward. And they directed all the planning, the design work for the WCIVA Parkway. So if the task force would contemplate some sort of legislative action, that's entirely up to the task force. But as of right now, what we're seeing with the task force is that you're going to give us guiding principles and instructions moving forward. And also these instructions applying to DOT is sort of commitments that we would agree as part of your report implementation. So we would also ask the same about instructions that would apply to other state agencies or local governments or other partners. So even without any legislative action, the recommendations, the guiding principles from this task force would carry weight and would be applied moving forward and would be monitored over time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Jason Lauritsen, your hand is raised. It looks like it's been raised for a little bit of time. You might be having troubles unmuting. I've just resent you a pen. There we go. Did you have a, I'm going to come back to Jason in just a moment. Valerie Hancher, your hand has been up. Do you have a clarifying question for Wei Wei?
Yes, ma'am. Just to kind of wrap my head around everything. So when we go to make recommendations, what month are we looking to make the recommendation for that week? I know she said something about, massaging it and seeing where, where we can make, changes and those things. But I know we're supposed to have this done in November. So, I mean, are we trying to do this in September so we can come back in October, kind of give y'all something final, and then make sure it's really what we want to go out in November? Just kind of looking at that. Maybe I missed it in the time frame.
We're starting at this virtual meeting to work with the task force on the recommendations for the needs list. So you're going to take a look at a comprehensive needs list today and tying them back to the statutory purposes and work on what we've missed so far, what changes that we need to make. And we're also looking at we'll be looking at a few guiding principle examples to work through. And then in the July meeting, we're hoping to wrap up the discussion on needs, and then we'll provide you with a comprehensive list of the guiding principles that's been documented so far and have very robust discussions on these guiding principles. So we're not waiting until the last minute the next few meetings, including today, we need to focus on looking at parts of the needs and the guiding principles that will be part of your recommendation, and also work on instructions for how to carry out these recommendations.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Valerie. Jason, your hand is still up. It looks like you've got the PIN number and everything. Did you have a clarifying question for Weiwei?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I was having some problems with my audio, so I apologize. Yes, I was wondering if in the process going forward, there will be an opportunity to revisit the weighting of various layers on the GIS tool and discuss where there might be potential conflicts as layers overlap, how we can work through which ones might have more importance.
Yeah, Jason, that's a great point. We've spent a lot of time working with the task force members on the avoidance and attraction layers. I don't think we necessarily have gotten into any of the weighting of these different layers. We've tried to categorize them. So yeah, we can spend more time working. It's a living tool. We have an update today about where we are with that tool. We're committed to working with the task force members to make sure that the tool is comprehensive. It includes all your comments and also reflect where you want to place all these layers in that tool. And this tool will guide our future planning, design, and PD&E decisions. And it's a living tool and it's available to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. All right, Charles, did you have some follow-up questions for Weiwei as well?
Well, it was just a comment, and that went back to Paul Owen's discussion. And that is that in the MCORS legislation that passed in 2019, there is a specific mandate in that legislation which states that the Department of Transportation shall adhere to the greatest extent practicable to the recommendations of the task force. So in a sense, the legislative connection has already been made, although I would agree that the situation with the Wekiva Parkway was more robust in terms of having the specific points of the task force recommendations individually spelled out in the legislation by reference. But there is a linkage now in the structure of the legislation. That was it.
Yeah, Charles, thank you for clarifying that.
All right. Well, there's been some really good conversation. You guys are using the hand raise perfectly, exactly how we had envisioned, and we appreciate your patience as we're working through all this. So with that, you're talking about the data layers, and many of you have talked to Billy Burke, but may not have met him quite yet. So here's Billy, and he's going to give us an update on those layers for the avoidance and attraction areas. So Billy.
All right, thank you, Christine. Good morning, everybody. In webinar number 1, we presented the process for identifying avoidance and attraction areas and requested input to task force recommendations. Following the webinar, we had technical briefings with you where you provided your comments and feedback on these topics, including the online GIS tool. We appreciate all your input and feedback. Now I will present an update on avoidance and attraction areas since webinar number 1. We appreciate all of the discussion during our technical briefings with task force members and are actively updating the GIS tool based on the layers requested for avoidance and attraction considerations by task force members, either during or following webinar number 1. Since this is a living tool and can be updated throughout the task force process, we have updated the task force for comments layer group to reflect all of the layers that have been requested by task force members for avoidance consideration. This layer group is now called Task Force Requests. Not all of the requested layers have been updated in the tool, and some have not been included for use. We will work with those task force members that requested these layers and discuss with them why they have not been added in additional follow-up coordination prior to Task Force Meeting 6. We revised some of the layer names to maintain consistency between the Southwest Central Florida Connector and the Suncoast Connector GIS tools, and added more functionality to the tool, including the draw and measurement features. The following layers were added to the GIS tool number 2 since the first webinar. These layers can be viewed by clicking Task Force Requests at the bottom of the tool. Springs Priority Focus Areas, Spring Sheds, Swallets. These are stream to sink features, which concentrate runoff into identifiable streams that disappear underground at specific points through sinkholes. Water Management District lands, Critical Land and Waters Identification Project, or CLIP, version 4 priorities. Critical habitats, which are essential to the conservation of endangered or threatened species and that may require special management and protection. Wildlife management areas, critical wildlife areas. These are areas that are established by the FWC to protect important wildlife concentrations from human disturbance during critical periods of their life cycles, such as nesting or migration. Prescribed fire, public truck parking, and Sable Trail pipeline to replace the natural gas pipeline layer. If you have any questions or need further clarification on the layers, in order to help facilitate this discussion, we will be reaching out to each task force member to schedule a follow-up to the previously held technical briefings. The GIS tool is a crucial piece to help link the guiding principles to the future phase implementation instructions as we look to move from the task force process into future phases of the MCORS program. Please remember that this is a living tool, and requests for updates to avoidance and attraction areas can be made and will be taken into consideration during the task force process. GIS tool number 2 can be found on the MCORS website by going to floridamcors.com and scrolling to the Interactive Maps drop-down menu, then selecting Northern Turnpike Connector GIS tool number 2. Note that this tool is also mobile friendly, which means it can be accessed through your mobile phones or other mobile devices. This is on the public MCORS website and can be accessed by the general public and task force members at any time during this process. Now I will hand it off to Christine to discuss high-level needs.
Thank you, Billy. So task force members, now is a really good time for you to go ahead and self-mute because we're going to open up the mics to be able to have some conversation. So we want to limit the background noise, so self-mute for now, and then we're going to open up for some of that conversation. So now let's turn to the working list of the high-level needs for this study area. In Weiwei's presentation, needs were described as key regional opportunities and challenges that corridor investments and related actions are intended to address. Remember that we should tie the 6 categories of purpose with the 13 potential benefits in the statute, so they can be transportation specific or transportation supported. These should be short statements and supported by data. And as you just heard from Billy, we are doing so much to aggregate that data and looking at that. As you contemplate needs and guiding principles, keep in mind, MCORS is a program and not a specific project. From early on in the start of the task force development, we were charged with preparing for 26 million residents in 2030. And 1.5 million more jobs. In order to do that, we must plan proactively and comprehensively. So you've talked about high-level needs, specifically in your in-person meeting number 3 in December, but your discussion has touched on regional challenges and opportunities at some point during every one of our in-person and virtual meetings to date. To help move this discussion along, our staff has culled together through all of our prior meeting notes and input to synthesize a draft list of high-level needs for your review. We targeted a list of fewer than 10 statements, and we ensured that all of them could be supported by data. Remember, our goal for these conversations is to build consensus. And as a reminder, at our first meeting, we agreed that consensus is striving for agreement that members can support, accept, live with, or agree not to oppose. So let's run through those draft high-level needs, and then we'll open it up for some conversation. So, revitalize rural communities, encourage job creation, provide regional connectivity, leverage technology, enhance quality of life and public safety, and protect the environment and natural resources. So they're listed here. We have them in numerical order. There's 9 of them. So please don't look at those as priorities. They're just references. So we want to provide a transportation network that supports existing communities and attracts new industries. We want to improve freight connectivity, address safety and mobility needs due to growth in population and visitation. We want to strengthen the local tourism and outdoor recreation economy, improve access to jobs, education, and healthcare. The next high-level needs are expand rural broadband infrastructure and access to broadband services, strengthen emergency evacuation, and a lot of focus has been put on evacuation, but we also want to focus on the response post-emergency. We want to protect and enhance wildlife habitat, regional ecosystems, and water resources. Prepare for emerging technologies such as autonomous, connected, electric, and shared vehicles. And so some of these technologies may also be useful, remember, to protect the wildlife as we talk about wildlife crossings and awareness. So here are the 9 all on one slide to make it easier for us to have this open conversation and dialogue. So we're going to have some folks join us. We've got Jennifer, Wei Wei, and Will has joined us. Hi, Will. Good morning. So we're going to open this up now for some facilitated conversation. So let's look at these 9 draft high-level needs. Do you have any clarification? This is where we're going to start using our hand raising again. Do you need any clarification from anyone here today? Is there anything on this list that is not clear to you of the 9? And we're going to focus on, we're going to drive some conversation of these 9 a little bit later. So remember, it's not all inclusive, but we do want to make sure that we're hitting the mark, as Wei Wei has shared, that we're really driving to consensus on this. So we have a few hands that have gone up. Charles, I'm going to unmute you. So any questions?
Yes. With regard to number 7, strengthen emergency evacuation and response, I have a concern that emergency evacuation is something in Florida that has suffered from what I would describe as mission creep. And there is no clear protocol for what is universally recommended for evacuation. It used to be that we evacuated coastal high hazard areas, and of course that's absolutely necessary. In about the past 8 years, particularly the period surrounding Hurricane Irma, we ended up with very broad scale calls for the general populace to evacuate. And that caused people who were in their homes, which were inland and upland areas, homes that had been designed and built after the post-Andrew building code changes, where the house is designed to generally withstand a 200-mile-an-hour storm, those people were getting out on the road in their cars. So what is the standard that we are going to use when we frame up the question of strengthening emergency evacuation? Hopefully, it's not going to be a sort of an overblown thing where you're expecting everybody in South Florida to get off the road and drive to North Florida. There needs to be a further honing down of what this means. That's it.
Thank you, Charles. Before anyone answers that,
Yeah,
can
I
I
was-
ask all task force members to
Yeah,
please
I was-
mute your phones, because we do
I was
have,
really
we're getting
surprised that-
feedback. Excellent. So, all right. So, Wei, Will, Jennifer?
I'll try to tackle it. Charles, it's a good question. During Irma and others where we've had large evacuations, it has overloaded our system. But you've got to battle the different priorities, not only from personal priority, but local government priorities as well. So this is a statewide issue, and we can certainly be part of that discussion with MCORS. But as you know, local evacuations is locally mandated. And then we also have to worry about the local concerns of individuals as well. Because even if they have a newly built home, they may still want to evacuate. So our system does get clogged down, even though we do have options like emergency shoulder use, it still can get overwhelmed. So planning for the future is important.
All right. Thank
Well,
you.
my point was simply that at one point in our history, we had a much more robust state level protocol for evacuation. When a gentleman by the name of Craig Fugate was in charge of our emergency response in Florida, things were very well framed up, and we seem to have drifted away from that. And so as a result, local governments are just sort of making up the playbook as they go along. And I'm thinking that DOT needs to, because its facilities are those that are going to be most overloaded, DOT perhaps needs to, as part of this process, call for a re-strengthening of the state protocol so that we get better uniformity.
Charles, that's a great point, and I think your point was echoed by a lot of other partners. So what I wanted to ask you is, what language can we use to sort of clarify the need statement, and then if the task force, comes up with any guiding principles for a more coordinated statewide approach to emergency evacuation, that's, we can hand that off to the agency that should take the lead on that task.
Well, my suggestion would simply be that to shorthand it, we're talking about emergency evacuation from coastal high hazard areas. Those are the sort of the gold standard of what has to be evacuated. It's very unusual to need to evacuate an inland area, and in fact, if you go back to the protocols that were actually written up in the 1990s and the early 2000s, you will see criteria that differentiate between areas that should evacuate and areas that are encouraged not to evacuate and instead to shelter in place. And so I would say, as a short statement, reference coastal high hazard areas, but then in the more detail, go back and pick up some of the language we had in our earlier plans that were working very well through the 90s and the 2000s.
All right. Thank you. We have a couple other hands up. Jason Lauritsen, you want to go ahead and unmute, and if you have a clarifying question or if you see something missing off the list.
Thank you. My
My comment and request is regarding level 8, high level need number 8. And specifically, while I don't disagree with those things as being important, I would like to be a little more clear in identifying wildlife corridors as was included in the Senate Bill 7068 language. It's, I believe, Section 1J, where it specifically calls out protection and enhancement of wildlife corridors. I know that that's further in the details and described when you get down into the background support for high-level needs, but it is important for me to have that called out as a high-level need specifically for corridors, just because of the linear nature of the kind of infrastructure corridors we're planning has a particular fragmenting effect on the connectivity of wildlife habitats, and the language we use for that is wildlife corridors.
All right.
Jason, it looks like number 8 starts. So what else do we need to add?
I would say protect and enhance wildlife habitat and wildlife corridors, or something along those lines, just to add that particular language in that line.
That's great input, and that's exactly the type of input we're looking for. And also know that we're very much into an iterative conversation. As you have fellow task force members introduce and recommend something like Jason just did, we want to make sure that if that gives anybody any moment for pause, this is a great time to discuss that as well, and we'll do that at our next meeting in July as well. But this is amending this language right here, right now, in real time. We're looking for feedback from one another. So Jason, thank you for providing that input.
Certainly.
All right, Kent Wimmer, you were next. What would you like to see amended or changed, or asked any questions here? Kent, you may be self-muted. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, excellent. We do.
Thank you. Hi, this is Kent Wimmer, Defenders of Wildlife. I will also talk to point number 8. Needed to be added to this list of important resources to be protected. We also need to protect existing public and private conservation lands. The state of Florida water management districts, federal agency, and local governments have conserved millions of acres and spent several billion dollars conserving these lands. So existing public and private conservation lands and those that are slated for conservation must not be impacted by MCORs. I've shared the data sets for these areas, and I'd like to see those included on the maps, please.
Amen.
And kept off limit, no impacts. Thank you.
All right. Valerie, was that you who commented?
No, I had my hand raised. Sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry. Oh, can I? Okay. I just,
Yes, ma'am.
looking at number 4, we probably need to do something about ecotourism with the bike paths and horse trails and those types of things. And then regarding number 8, the water resources, is that including like our watersheds, our springs, and those types? Do we need to detail that out more, just beside water resources?
Remember, these are the needs, right? So we're still going to talk about guiding principles along the way. So are you referring to number 8?
Yeah, when you're saying water resources, the high level needs to protect, Is that also including the watershed areas and the springs? Is that all inclusive?
Yes, but if there's need for clarification, when we go through the guiding principles conversation, which is coming up next, that might shed some light on it. Wei Wei, did you want to offer up?
Well, so far, what we've heard that with regard to need number 8, we need to add protect and enhance wildlife corridors in addition to habitats, and maybe clarify water resources a bit more. So we'll
Yes.
bring back something for you guys to review at your meeting in July.
Thank you, ma'am.
And you'll see
Thank
additional
you, Valerie.
slides that reinforce, because this is kind of step 1. And we've got 2 more steps of details still to go through with the report and the discussion. So we can go deeper and deeper and deeper.
Excellent. Thank you, Valerie. Chris, you're the last one with the hand up. You're self-muted, Chris, if you want to contribute.
All right.
There we go.
Can you hear me now? All right.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, two points. The first being that we would support the wildlife crossing connectivity statement being added to number 8. In addition, it's minor, but from our standpoint, if we could add the word fish in front of wildlife habitats, so it would read protect and enhance fish and wildlife habitats. Florida is known as the fishing capital of the world, so we want to make sure we don't forget about our fish. And then number 2, second point is that on the GIS data set, I was noticing that Marion County farmlands is one of the data sets that's included in the will not impact category. And we're not really addressing agriculture protection as a need in these 9 statements of need. So I wanted to throw that out to the task force and see if there's a way to identify protecting agriculture through, somewhere in these need statements, because that's really important from our standpoint. A lot of agriculture is providing fish and wildlife habitat as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
for
you.
bringing up the ag issue. We'll have a discussion on that specific topic at your July meeting, and then we'll add that to the draft high-level needs list.
Great. Commissioner Kennard, we haven't heard from you. Do you have a clarifying question? You're currently self-muted.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in and say that as it appears we're slowly painting the entire regional map in a magenta color, I don't want to lose sight of the opportunities presented by this corridor in bringing utilities through some areas that would provide sewer service, which does our groundwater, does protect our watershed. Citrus County in particular has roughly a 600-acre industrial park that's getting quickly surrounded in a pink magenta coloring, an area that is sorely lacking in utilities, needs some economic development, and I think would be served well by a corridor like this. So I just want to be I understand each and everybody's concerns, but I do want to make sure that we're not painting this entire map a do not go or do not interfere with type of area, because it can provide some opportunities to help clean up sins of the past for sure.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, Charles, you have your hand up one more time, and I think that will wrap up this section of the draft high-level needs. Did you have something else to add?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Point number 1 on this list and point number 5 on this list imply support for continuing or expanding urban development. And both of these points are placed in this list without any cognizance of or reference to the adopted local government comprehensive plans of counties and cities. And I would strongly recommend that wherever we talk about the need to support additional development or attracting new industries or anything like that, that we place the emphasis on as planned by local governments in their comprehensive plans. The second point is with regard to number 6, expanding broadband. And this is where I want to voice some support for what I just heard from Commissioner Carnahan. And that is that we're on this list of 9, we seem to have chosen to cherry pick out only the issue of broadband, not to diminish broadband's importance, but the act that was passed by the legislature in 2019 setting up MCORs clearly referenced water and sewer as an objective. And I agree with the commissioner that there are opportunities to provide water and sewer that could be facilitated in certain areas. And we ought not to lose sight of that by truncating this list too far. So I would hope that we could hew to the local government comprehensive plans and reference that. And I would hope that we could also expand number 6 to include water and sewer in addition to broadband. My final point is with regard to number 2. In addition to what you have in your local comprehensive plans, you also have the need to connect one region of Florida to another potentially. And in number 2, we only refer to freight. And I'm thinking that you might want to consider number 2 being broader than just freight in terms of connectivity. Obviously, if you connect the Turnpike at Wildwood over to some location near US 19, you're not going to just be dealing with freight, you're going to be dealing with passenger vehicles. So it seems to me like the metric ought to be including freight connectivity as well as other either regional or interstate vehicle connectivity.
All right. Thank you, Charles, for that input. I've written down some notes. That's why I've been busy doing this as well. So in summary, I've heard that we really need to think through the definition of water resources and thinking through what this agriculture protection area is and identifying within that agriculture also fish and wildlife on number 8. So we've got a team full of folks taking additional notes through this, and we'll bring back to you all at our next meeting. And keep in mind that these are kind of the needs, the why. Wei Wei talked about that in her presentation. We're going to move into the conversation of the how. And some of the items that we're discussed here might fit more nicely into the how, working on how we will ultimately implement that and or the instructions for the PD&E. And that's the what's next. And that becomes a more fine conversation along the way. So we appreciate this robust conversation here, and we'll look to bring these back to you all at our meeting in July. So thank you. So I've got a commercial break here for a second, just reminding folks that we have extended the time to register for public comment period. So that will end at 11 today, so in about 15 minutes. For those of you who want to register to make a public comment during this period, you need to do that in the next 15 minutes. We've enhanced our approach to the public comment period to be more in line with our in-person meetings. And requests to comment may be made now up until 11 and will be addressed during the public comment period in the order in which they were received. If you've not yet registered to provide those comments during today's virtual meeting and wish to do so, please sign up on the website under today's event. If you need a link emailed to you, please use the hand raise function and one of our team members will email you a link to sign up. Comments can be submitted anytime at fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us. All right, back to our regularly scheduled program. Okay, so our guiding principles. All right, task force members, please remain self-muted through this conversation as well. Jennifer's going to walk through the data and draft principles, and then we'll have some conversation after that. So let's review how some of the examples of guiding principles and instructions. In Weiwei's presentation earlier, guiding principles were described as our core values to guide our decisions about corridor and regional planning and development. That's the how. They are intended to be short statements supported by some technical notes whenever we need to do that. So instructions were described as direction provided by the task force for future project development and implementation activities to ensure that our guiding principles are applied as you all intend. These would be much more specific, and I think you all were getting at that just a moment ago. So we don't have time to cover all the guiding principles today, so we selected a sample of just 3 of them based on your topics at recent meetings and to start making some progress here. We promise to dive into the other ones when we get together next month. These topics were chosen to help us gain a common understanding of the how our guiding principles can address 3 different approaches or focus areas. They are avoidance, attraction, and technology. We'll discuss the rest of the guiding principles in more detail in July, as I mentioned. Jennifer is going to run through how these guiding principles and instructions were developed and how they'll open up. Then we'll open it up for some more discussion and hand raising. So now I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer to introduce the first of 3 topics.
Thank you, Christine. Our first topic for discussion today is an example of an avoidance feature related to environmental protection. Springheads. Locations of springheads in our study area are displayed on the map. This data can be viewed directly from GIS tool number 2. A springhead is the fountain of the spring and is often confused with spring shed, which is an area within a ground or surface water basin that contributes to the spring flow. Today, we are only addressing spring heads that are part of the will not impact areas. In the July meeting, we will be expanding this discussion to include spring sheds, spring priority focus areas, spring protection zones, and aquifer recharge resources. We have separate guiding principles that deal with protection and enhancement for these resources. We have populated high-level needs, guiding principles, and draft instructions into the framework, which shows you how your recommendations on needs and guiding principles tie together with the MCOR's purpose and instructions for project development and beyond that will guide FDOT during implementation. Avoiding springheads supports the MCOR's purpose of protecting the environmental and natural resources. Based on the high-level need to protect and enhance wildlife habitats, regional ecosystems, and water resources, a draft guiding principle was developed to avoid and do not impact springheads. This is just one example of environmental and natural resources guiding principles. We will discuss more of these in the July meeting. Instructions that will be followed during project development and beyond are avoid encroaching and prohibit construction, including staging near springheads, use erosion control measures to minimize erosion and sedimentation during construction, and develop a springhead protection plan that will be followed during construction when springhead is in the vicinity of the corridor.
All right, so task force members, we're still live. So let's talk through this. You now see the flow of the needs, which is the why, the guiding principle, which is the how, and then the draft instructions, kind of really getting down to the detail of ultimately how we go about meeting those guiding principles along the way. So let's talk about this. Remember, we're going to highlight 3 of the 9 and walk through the initial guidance. So this is a little bit more kind of practicing as we work through this and understand how each of these build upon one another. So for task force members, do we have any questions that you want clarified by staff? Once again, we'll use the hand raise. And generally, do you feel as if this represents our conversation so far? At water management districts, we've heard a lot from you all about protecting the environment and natural resources and how we might go about doing that. Is there anything you all would like to add to this conversation? Have we hit the mark? Could we improve? Jeanette, was that you we heard?
No, I'm just reviewing what's on the screen, trying to see if there'd be some additional for that last column on the draft instructions, if there'd be anything additional that would be beneficial.
And remember, we're not one and done here today. This is kind of working through this exercise to see how refined we can be in our conversation. And we know that for some of our task force members, this is the first time you've gone through this level of conversation. So we'll be back with this. We do have some other folks with their hands raised along the way. So let's start with you, Jason.
Yes, thank you. Jason Lauritsen from the Florida Wildlife Corridor. I have a question as it pertains to other, the Springhead example brings up some areas where the conflict with certain other layers on the map. And so I was just hoping that we could discuss how we might in this process address potential conflicts. And if I might, as an example, there are some areas of conflict visible when you turn on the future land use plan layer and the Florida Ecological Greenways network layer in the GIS2 tool. One of those areas you find in Marion County, where the future land use residential area has the potential just north of Denellen to sever the Priority 1 Florida Ecological Greenways network layer. US 41 also crosses this section, and this section is a stretch of the Florida Wildlife Corridor that connects the Nature Coast to the Green Swamp. So here's an area where you have 2 layers that are both represented in those guiding principle conversations, and they could be opportunities, they could be avoidance considerations, and I'd love to have some opportunity to discuss this. My intention is to submit a letter to the task force facilitator, Christine, to provide a little additional information about this kind of conflict and perhaps in this Denellen area as an example, so that it might serve as a point of consideration and discussion for future conversations. I don't know if this is the time to get into that here, but I just see in these guiding principles that there's overlap, and I'd like to know that we will have an opportunity to meaningfully address those kinds of conversations in a productive way, where we're getting at some identifiable enhancements or opportunities.
We're always going to have time as we're working through this to drill down and have clarifying conversations. And Jason, in Billy's presentation, he commented getting back with folks that had provided some additional data. So that might be a really good opportunity for us to have a little bit larger conversation so that we have more clarity on what you're requesting and where it fits best, so that we're prepared when we come back in our July meeting to expand that conversation. How does that sound?
That sounds great. I'm very concerned about, the sunshine law areas, and I know there are some people very invested in that particular area on the task force, and I don't want to short sell the conversation. So I will be happy to provide information to you at the FDOT to consider hopefully making that available to the full task force so that can provide background for a more rich, productive conversation going forward. But I'd love to continue to meet with Billy and the GIS folks to tease out some more of these issues.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Paul, you've joined us. Put your hand up. Do you have a question or some clarification?
Yeah, I was wondering about on the last column, it talks about project development and beyond. And I see some ways that it does address the project development, but I'm wondering about the beyond that involves development that might result from the construction from the new highway. Is there any way to build that in, the beyond in? Am I overlooking something that addresses beyond? And might this be an opportunity to build in a reference to comprehensive plans, as I think Charles mentioned?
Paul, that's a great thought. We here, I think the three instructions are mostly related to project development. So yeah, any thoughts about land use related to construction or anything, put your thoughts ahead in front of the task force. If this guiding principle, this is not the right place for it, we'll make sure that it's reflected in our next draft for your review in the July meeting, please.
All right, great input, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you.
Valerie, I noticed your hand's up, and I think you may have mentioned something earlier and I didn't quite catch it. So would you like to ask a question or expand the conversation?
Yes, ma'am. I don't think I mentioned anything. If I did, I might have looked at my cell phone or something. My apologies. But I would like to see if the gentleman, I apologize, I forget his name, if we could share that information. And the Dunellen area is, definitely needs to be protected and looked at in any information that we can get, because just not the spring heads are in our area, but a lot of the sanctuaries for birds and such. I think that is something that we need to make sure that we protect. I know that we have the high level needs, protect and inhabit, and the enhance the wildlife, but definitely if we could see his information, that would be greatly appreciated.
Excellent. Yeah, and that would be done in a more in our open format. So
Yes,
that conversation, Jason Lauritsen will ask him to bring that back for a larger conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a few more hands up. We do have a couple more of these examples to work through. So Jim, we haven't heard from you. What would you like to contribute? Jim?
Yes, I wanted to point out that one of the things that was brought up in the needs discussion had to do with preserving and respecting existing private and public conservation lands. And I think that that is a very, very important guiding principle, because I think that that is the way that we get to protecting the spring shed, protecting existing land use, protecting even the wildlife corridors, by having by making sure that what has been identified as needing to be protected, it meets multiple needs. But I think that that needs to be a very powerful, but it belongs in the guiding principle rather than needs. So that's just my thoughts.
Excellent. Speaking more to the how we do these things. Excellent. All right. So we've got a few more. Warren, we haven't heard from you. What would you like to contribute?
Yes, Christine, I know you were asking earlier before for input from the water management, and I'm somewhat confused in the spring head example, and then just was seeking clarification if I know in the previous discussion we were talking about ecotourism. I'm somewhat confused in are we talking about directing people towards the spring head for ecotourism or away from them for protection? And then, the other thing to keep in mind from a groundwater perspective is if you're directing people or directing routes or directing development away from a spring head, you're inevitably bringing the development into a spring recharge area, because that water at the head is coming from somewhere. And so I just wanted, it kind of goes back to the balance or the conflict discussion we just had. That was it.
All right. Thank you. That's important feedback for us. Everybody's writing notes. You can't see us, but we'll come back and hopefully there's some clarity with that. We have two more hands up. Kent, you've had your hand up for a little bit. What would you like to add to this conversation?
Thank you very much. This is Kent Wimmer, Defenders of Wildlife. I appreciate you talking about spring heads, and but to be honest, this is very low-hanging fruit. Most spring heads are on public lands and they're part of state parks. You're not going to run a highway over top of a spring head. I really look forward to the discussion, of what it's actually going to take, to protect the spring sheds for the water that's coming out of the end of the pipes, which is the spring head. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. And Charles, you're the last one with your hand up, and then we'll move on to the next subject matter.
Yes. With regard to the draft instructions, I think when you get down to the level of the draft instructions, there needs to be significantly more specificity than is listed here. For example, the one at the top, avoid encroaching and prohibit construction, including staging near spring heads. Well, what does near mean? Are we talking about 3 miles? Are we talking about 300 feet? There needs to be some definition put on that, and I would suggest that the DOT reach out specifically and get some input from entities like the Florida Springs Council, as well as the water management districts involved, to get a bit more specificity put in that. The second thing is, with regard to spring heads, is typically when you get close to the spring head, you also get into what is described as a highly karst area. And one of the protocols you want to be looking at is not placing retention ponds on top of karst features. That could be a very serious problem. You typically, when you load a retention pond, you could get a breakthrough and inject that water directly into the spring. So some numbers on the distance and some specific protocols regarding retention facility in karst areas are very important. And I would recommend we drill down in this column to that level of specificity.
All right, great input. Well, this has been some pretty robust conversation. I really appreciate it. And we've got two more subject areas to talk about. So I'm going to hand it back over to Jennifer, who's going to provide guiding principles related to the attraction, which is our second topic.
Thank you, Christine. So the second topic for discussion today is economic development, which is an attraction feature. And the data used are opportunity zones, employment, and future land use. These data are displayed here and can be viewed through the online GIS tool. An opportunity zone is a low-income census tract nominated by the governor and designated to spur economic development and job creation in economically distressed communities. The data shown on the maps on this slide remind us of the complexity of the process as you will see some areas identified as opportunity zones intersect or are adjacent to conservation areas. So to some of the points that our task force members were making. Okay, so economic development supports the MCOR's purpose of revitalizing rural communities and encouraging job creation. Based on the high-level needs to provide a transportation network that supports existing communities and attracts new industries, and improve access to jobs, education, and healthcare. A draft guiding principle was developed to enhance potential economic development opportunities and employment benefits in the study area. Instructions that will be followed during project development and beyond for this guiding principle are: maintain consistency with local government comprehensive plans and future land use, and support local or community vision. Christine?
All right, so now you see this looping back in this comprehensive policy plan in support of economic development. So we have some folks here today representing economic development and local government. Look this over. Have we touched the why, our needs, and how we might go about that, our guiding principles, and looking what kind of some of those instructions for what's next? How do we go about doing that, and being mindful during the project development and beyond? Are we missing anything here? Is there something more we need to do to flush this out? Let's go ahead and use our hand raising if you all have anything that you feel as if we could improve upon in this conversation. Local governments, economic development folks, have we hit the mark? Bradley, yes, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, when we were talking about the draft high-level needs and trying to figure out where the best place, like under number 8, whether water resources included, public water and sewer infrastructure to be able to serve economic development, that may be the part where the revision on the draft high-level needs is under number 1. It's actually transportation and other, water sewer infrastructure network. That may be where we would add that particular component of infrastructure to separate it from what other people will always look at water resources as typically springhead and other type of protection areas.
It's great input. Thank you. Valerie, what would you like to add to this?
Yes, I'm not sure where you would put it, but perhaps where it says provide transportation network, that we also add that we enhance and support the current transportation, public transportation of the different cities and counties. For instance, in Marion County, we have SunTran. So that might be something that way people can access the jobs and their health and their shopping by, using the public transportation that we have in place now, and that we can enhance it, because as we grow, we are, of course, going to need more public transportation for all of our areas. I'm just not sure how that fits in.
Well, we'll bring something back to you during our next meeting, and that ties into, we always say that this is a program that is multimodal and multi-use. So that really helps kind of draw that focus area as well. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. So economic development, we've had a lot of conversation around this. So remember, we're kind of wrapping this up, and so we'll look to finalize some of these at our next meeting. So now let's move to the third topic, broadband. We've talked a lot about that. Jennifer.
Thank you, Christine. In the previous webinars and meetings, we've discussed technology and broadband. And here we are presenting data to support technology and broadband needs in the study area. These data can be viewed through the online GIS tool. Okay, so addressing broadband supports the MCOR's purposes of revitalizing rural communities, encouraging job creation, and leveraging technology. Based on the draft high-level need to expand rural broadband infrastructure and access to broadband service, 2 draft guiding principles are: plan and design enhanced or new corridors to enable co-location of broadband infrastructure in right-of-way, and ensure broadband provider access to FDOT right-of-way is non-discriminatory and competitively neutral. Instructions that will guide project development and beyond are: allow multiple providers in the same right-of-way using separate conduits or duct banks, and prioritize additional infrastructure needs and funding sources needed to accommodate the corridor, and support local plans to address broadband connectivity gaps. Christine?
All right, task force members, we have talked a lot about broadband as a group, so we should all be prepared to kind of roll up our sleeves in this conversation and wrap some of this up. Since our last meeting, the governor has signed into law DEO's partnership and role in some of this. And remember, I think Weiwei really focused on there are opportunities where DOT leads and where DOT partners. And DOT will not always be the lead in some of these, but our conversation should inform how our communities are evolving. So broadband, we've had some conversation. James, anything you want to add from a partnership standpoint as well?
No, the department is, like you say, it's a brand new program, and we are looking at it. We're still in the infant stages, but certainly we do view partnership as a large part of implementing that program.
Excellent. Or, we think about rural, sorry, I struggle with that word sometimes, broadband infrastructure and access to broadband. We also know that some of our providers are changing in the way they operate, and those providers of education as well. So I know we've focused somewhat on the needs of our changing communities and our reliance on broadband. Anything in addition that people would like to add to this conversation? Have we addressed it? I mean, we've talked about it quite enough, extensively, shall we say. Charles, what would you like to add? You're self-muted, Charles, if you're trying to share.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Thanks.
Yeah, MCORs will provide opportunities, and I think whether it's built, to put conduit banks in the right of way. But MCORs does not necessarily have to be the backbone of broadband. And in fact, the opportunity to locate broadband wires, if you will, along existing highways, state highways and county roads is probably something that's going to appear a lot faster on a map than MCORs will. And so as the deployment of a response to the legislation that passed this year on broadband occurs, I'm hoping that it will be faster and it will be linked to existing corridors rather than waiting for new corridors.
Weiwei.
Yeah, Charles, help us think through, is that a guiding principle level statement that you want to put in there, or should that be in the instructions?
I think it's probably a detail in the instructions.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Well, I want to make sure that, everyone feels comfortable as we move into our July meeting that this is the exercise we're going to be going through, thinking through our needs. Why do we tie this to this larger program and each one of those needs, and our guiding principles as to how will we implement these going through, and then that instructions for the PD&E, kind of what does that stay with the construction of the project, and maybe even think through how we operate that in the long term, depending on what that ultimate need is. So I think this has been great conversation of the exercise and process. I'm getting some detailed notes here. Sorry, told you there's lots of folks taking notes along the way. So, highlighting, looping back what we heard about the partnerships and James, the DEO organization and DOT. I think it follows a lot of kind of larger conversations that we've had with local governments as well in our panel conversation. And then Charles thinking through what the existing corridors versus new corridors moving forward. So anything, Wei, Will, that you wanted to add as we wrap up this conversation on these three examples?
I just want to thank everybody for their participation, and I think the four-step process is helping all of us kind of understand where we need to be come October and November. So as far as process-wise, I think we can get there. We've got to work through each guiding principle systematically in the next few meetings, and look forward to more discussions and more resolutions on the guiding principles. So thank you.
Yeah, I would like to thank everyone for the robust conversation as well. Please just be thinking about some, when you give us instructions, it's not just limited to DOT. Some of these guiding principles and needs are very broad. When you give us instructions, develop these instructions, think about the potential partnerships that we can utilize or we need to be forming to implement the MCORS program.
All right. So thank you, task force members. I'm going to hand it back over to our co-chair.
All right. That was great. Thank you, Christine, Wei, Will, Jennifer, Billy. I'd like to recap a few of the next steps before we begin the public comment period. First, today's presentation and the virtual meeting recording will be posted on the website. Second, the staff will continue to be available to address any technical questions you have throughout the process. Next steps should include bringing back needs and guiding principles that incorporate today's discussion. Today, we have discussed a sample of guiding principles, and we will discuss the remaining guiding principles in the July 22nd meeting. Finally, we will communicate with you as soon as we have solidified the format of the July meeting, where we'll establish initial consensus on the high-level needs, refine draft guiding principles, and discuss draft instructions for project development and beyond. And I believe also this is just in, I hear Wei has a quick announcement for us. Wei, do you have something you?
Thank you, Christina. On behalf of Secretary Thibault, I'm pleased to let you know that FDOT District 5 Secretary Jared Perdue has been appointed as the new chair of the Northern Turnpike Corridor Task Force. Secretary Perdue replaces former Assistant Secretary Tom Byron, who retired in March of 2020. Secretary Perdue was appointed to his current position as District Secretary in May 2020. In this role, he oversees dozens of projects and operations in the 9-county region, including Sunrail, I-4 Ultimate, and the Wekiva Parkway project. Previously, Secretary Perdue served as District Director of Transportation Development and in a variety of leadership roles within the department. Secretary Perdue looks forward to working with each of you and will be in attendance at your task force meeting number 6 in July. We would also like to thank Vice Chair Christina Colon for her active role in chairing your past few webinars. Jared and Christina will be working together with you to fulfill your statutory responsibilities over the next few months. Christina, thank you, and back to you.
All right, great. That is exciting news. I've worked with Jared before, and he's going to be a fantastic captain here. So, all right, this concludes our formal presentation for today. We will now move on to the public comment period of our virtual meeting. I want to continue to emphasize how important this input is to the process, and that public comment during our meetings is only one way for the public to provide their input to us. Public comments may be submitted at any time to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us and will become part of the public record. Let's now hear comments from members of the public who registered to speak and are on the virtual meeting with us today. Christine, can you please introduce the public comment portion of this virtual meeting?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I will ask for one indulgence. We do have a task force member that had a quick follow-up question. Would you all be okay if we get that addressed real quick from Paul Owen?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay,
Kristen,
Paul.
this is just a request. I realize they are evolving documents based on the input of the task force, but if there were a way to make the guiding principles, the implementation strategies, anything up to date on the list of avoidance and attraction features more readily accessible, so that I'm familiar with the process, so I can go into the various meetings and pull out the documents and extract them. But your average person from the public who might like to see where we are on all of these may not be as familiar. If it were possible to make that a little more accessible on the website, I think that would be really helpful. I know it'd be helpful to the task force, but it would be helpful to the public who are trying to keep up.
Wait, did you want to respond?
Yeah, Paul, that's a great point. We'll, I know everything's available on the website, but we'll make it more visible that people can just take a look at the most current versions of the needs, the guiding principles. Thank you for that suggestion.
Thanks, Huawei.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul, for that request. All right, so on to public comment. Thank you, Christina, and thank you for your service as our co-chair. It's been wonderful working with you, and we'll continue to do that. You're still a member of the task force, so we look forward to continuing to work. So let's go to our public comment period. So the public comment period is expected still to take about 30 minutes, and as always, we encourage everyone to stay engaged during this portion of our virtual meeting. So, with that, I mentioned earlier, enhanced the public comment period to be more in line with our in-person meetings. Requests to comment were received by 11 o'clock this morning, so just within the last half hour. And we will call on them in the order in which the requests were received. If you do not respond when your name is called, we will provide a second chance at the end of the public comment period. So for those of the public who are going to speak, when your name is called, we will unmute your line in order for you to provide the comment within the allotted 3-minute time. You will hear a tone when you have 30 seconds remaining, and then another one when your time is up. The line will be muted after 3 minutes, so please keep your eye on the clock and listen out for the tones. If you have more information that you would like to share with the group, you can always provide additional comments in writing for further consideration. You can send comments anytime to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us. So once again, only one person at a time will be unmuted. If you've self-muted, please be sure to unmute before speaking. So the first two people that registered to speak this morning are Lindsay Cross from St. Petersburg and Herman Younger from Gainesville. Lindsay.
Good morning. This is Lindsay Cross with Florida Conservation Voters. I know that we are living in unusual times and we're all trying to navigate how to operate safely and effectively. DOT, I recognize that you've made some modifications to the webinar today. However, the format is still disjointed and the conversation felt flat. Aggressively continuing with the task force meetings at this time is not sufficient for receiving robust feedback from the task force and community members, nor is it appropriate for advancing an issue that will impact our economic, physical, and community landscapes for decades to come. Today, I'd like to ask you as DOT staff and consultants if you're truly doing the best you can to involve the public in this process in a meaningful way, or if you're merely going through bureaucratic checkboxes. It is your job, DOT, to conduct this process in a way that conforms with the sunshine requirements, as we previously reminded you in reference to the letter from the First Amendment Foundation. I would argue, however, that you should be going above and beyond the letter of the law to seek ways to build trust within communities. We know from verbal comments received at in-person meetings and on these webinars that the public is overwhelmingly against building these roads. We have a pretty good idea from the thousands of emails through DOT lists that the public through this format has also said to not build these roads. But we know that only because concerned organizations have made public records requests using the Freedom of Information Act. Just yesterday, the Center for Biological Diversity made another records request for public comments from February through this month. You have noted that the task force members will receive these comments in July, but there has been no meaningful attempt to collate and categorize these in a way that is accessible and digestible to the public. And one member of the public on a recent webinar refers to this email depository as a black hole. Electronic public notifications have been slow, even when you're aware of a meeting weeks in advance. So for any members of the public interested in this meeting, they would not have received electronic notification until 5 p.m. on Sunday evening. And the agenda was not provided that time, making it exceedingly difficult for the public to be informed and well prepared. I'll also reference the lack of transparency on the enormous cost to taxpayers if these roads are built. Our budget shortfall will be in the billions of dollars this year, which is why 80 organizations, including Florida Conservation Voters, have called on Governor DeSantis to redirect the $90 million in this year's budget away from MCORs into actual needs facing everyday Floridians, like protecting their health and economic future. In this webinar, Commissioner Carnahan used the term sins of the past. The needs of our state have shifted, but these roads have consistently been bad for our state. If these roads are built, future generations will certainly classify these as sins of the past that they'll be saddled with fixing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cross, for your comment. Up next, Herman Younger from Gainesville, Florida. Herman, you are unmuted.
Hello, my name is Herman Younger. I am the organizing representative for the Sierra Club based in Gainesville, Florida. Task force members, we find ourselves in unprecedented times of great uncertainty. Businesses are suffering and our healthcare and education industries are lacking adequate funding and resources as a result of COVID-19. As task force members, you represent some of these very sectors that are in serious need of government assistance. I ask you today to act with your consciousness and urge Governor DeSantis to strike the $90 million in funding for MCORs from the 2020-2021 budget so that funding can be redirected to help the unemployed, small businesses, agricultural producers and workers, and other Floridians hit hard by COVID-19 and its repercussions. Our essential industries and services cannot afford to suffer due to the funding of this destructive, unnecessary toll road project. Please act with urgency and make your position against this waste of taxpayer dollars known to the public today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Younger, for your comment. Up next is Eugene Kelly from Brooksville, Florida. Eugene, you are unmuted.
Thank you, and good morning. I'm speaking on behalf of the Florida Native Plant Society, and I would like to thank at least one member of the task force who, at the beginning of the meeting, did acknowledge the importance of agriculture, agricultural lands within your study area. The Native Plant Society thinks we need to shine more of a spotlight, put more focus on the importance of agriculture within this region of Florida. The environmental and economic significance of conservation and agricultural lands is reflected in a lot of the spatial data represented on the interactive map developed for MCORs and being considered by the task force members. Those data include approved Florida Forever project areas and rural and family land project areas, a lot of habitat for imperiled plant and animal species. Those are lands largely that have not been protected, through conservation. Nearly all that land area is privately owned agricultural land. Same's true of the ecological greenways network. We talk a lot about maintaining connectivity. It can't happen unless those private agricultural lands are incorporated into the conservation network. We've encouraged the consideration of all those data by all three MCORS task forces since the inception of this process. I think there's other data that reflects the importance of agriculture to the natural resources and economy of the study area. The Farm Bill supported projects are a source of information we think you need to fold into your decision making. Such programs as Wetland Reserve Program, Wildlife Habitat Improvement Program, the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, and conservation technical assistance provided to agricultural landowners. Through those programs, the Farm Bill over the course of the past several decades has invested billions of taxpayer dollars to maintain or enhance agricultural productivity, habitat values, and protect watersheds and water quality. Farm Bill spending in Florida totaled $86 million in 2019, and that was a lean year. Over the 15 years since 2005, more than $1.9 billion, or an average of $127 million a year, has been invested to support agriculture in Florida. Those figures aren't broken down by county, but I'm trying to get that data to share with you at your next meeting. I expect that given the prominence of agriculture in your region, that spending is going to be pretty significant. The guiding principles you develop place a lot of focus on minimizing impacts to our investments in conservation, and we think the billions invested in support of agriculture need to be part of your considerations going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Up next is Amy Datz from Tallahassee, Florida. Amy, you are unmuted.
I have been a professional environmental scientist for over 40 years. My area of expertise is air pollution and green engineering for transit design. I'm an activist, not a lobbyist or a consultant. 3 issues I have not seen in the high-level needs are the cost of congestion and design of the connectivity between these 3 road segments, and the emphasis on multimodalism. Study the cost-benefit analysis of how much savings there will be, not only in movement of freight, but also farm products and people in vehicles, bicycles, pedestrians, and public transportation. After all, time is money, but also in the reduction of medical costs if air pollution is reduced through reduced congestion and increased internet connectivity. The trucking industry loses $5 billion a year in congestion, passing that cost on to all Floridians. This industry must be a partner in planning ways to move and store their trucks, but all modes must also be considered. Study major areas of congestion and determine the best alignment that will provide the maximum reduction in congestion statewide. Studies show currently the connection with the Suncoast and I-4 and 275 are some of the worst congested areas in the nation and need improvement. Please design the connection between these 3 project corridors to maximize efficient connection to each other and the existing system. Do not design the northern terminus of the southwest corridor and the Suncoast terminus to dump traffic onto I-4, creating more congestion on I-4. There must be an option to exit on I-4, but not force traffic onto I-4 to connect these two roads. Make these two new roads contiguous. Design the connectivity of the Northern Turnpike directly to the current Turnpike as an efficient, continuous connection. Also connecting it to the two new corridor roads. There could be a HOV streamlining lane to connect between this Turnpike project and the Southwest Corridor. The current Turnpike dumps traffic onto I-75. This traffic design should avoid forcing traffic on 75 to connect to this new Turnpike extension. An area of great contention involves wildlife. Study roadkill statistics to identify where wildlife crossings will be most effective. Provide wildlife wildlife crossing videos to the public on your website so they will better understand how they save wildlife. When I moved to Florida in 1974, there were 20 panthers. Today, there are over 220 panthers. Some part of that success be attributed to the limited access roadways and well-planned wildlife crossings. FTEOT has won many national and international awards for their work in this area. Sea level rise must also be a layer in your analysis. With the temperature predicted at over 100 degrees for the next 2 weeks in the Arctic Circle, this is an important level of analysis to be considered for these corridor projects. I'm over 65 years old. These webinars are the only way I can participate in the meetings without jeopardizing my life. Please plan both in-person and web-connected meetings in the future.
Time's up, Mr. Stats. Thank you. Up next is Matthew Shorts from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Matthew, you are unmuted.
Hi, good morning. Matthew Schwartz, South Florida Wildlands Association. I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs. I've done this in the other task force meetings this week from the Florida Trend. It's an article written in 2016 on the history of this project. A little more than a decade ago, this is a 2016 article, so we're talking about 2006. A little more than a decade ago, a handful of large landowners and land use attorneys got together to map out a new future for the agricultural interior of Central Florida. And I'm talking about the Heartland Expressway now, but of course this applies to the entire MCORS project. The linchpin was a new, nearly 150-mile long toll highway linking the outskirts of Orlando with the Southwest Florida coast and unlocking development potential on all the ranch lands and citrus groves in between. They called it the Heartland Parkway. To the people and companies behind it, heavyweight Florida businesses, including Alico, A. Duder and Sons, Likes Brothers, Mosaic, among others, the Heartland Parkway made sense. The development of Florida's interior was inevitable, they argued, as more people moved to the state and control of agricultural companies passed on to a new generation of heirs with little interest in cattle or citrus. A highway would create a corridor in which landowners could develop portions of their property more intensely and more rapidly while setting the rest aside in conservation easements. So I could stop the reading and discussion of the article here. It lays out in a way that anyone can understand what is the real purpose, the high-level needs, and the guiding principles of MCORS, all in a couple of paragraphs. MCORS is being presented as a kind of great public works project that will have all kinds of benefits for the people and even the wildlife of Florida. The task force members are being thanked for their public service. In reality, this is a project designed to help large landowners to cash in on their properties and make them more desirable for developers. Unfortunately, I believe the task force members are being used terribly in this process on behalf of people who are not participating in these discussions. Their work is done, and they're just waiting in the wings for the benefits that are sure to come their way once this boondoggle is built. The bureaucrats running this project are doing an excellent job trying to sell the supposed benefits of MCORS, but think that the locals have already decided exactly what this project is. A fundamental question for a real democracy is who asked for MCORS? Not local, county, or municipal governments, not civic or environmental organizations, just a collection of wealthy landowners and land use attorneys working with politicians in the Florida Senate and House. And our new governor, who promised to turn a new page on the environment, that decided to throw that legacy away in exchange for support of this project. So at this point, I could say if any representatives of Governor DeSantis is here, turn the corner on this thing in the next legislative session, push for new legislation that will rescind MCORS, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Up next is Kristen Rubin from High Springs, Florida. Kristen, you are unmuted.
Hi, Kristen Rubin, our Santa Fe River. In regards to the high-level needs, all can be addressed by adding mass transit, adding broadband to existing avenues like other states are already doing, and improving our existing infrastructures and focus on protecting wildlife habitats. And all of this will add jobs. In fact, these toll roads will increase overbuilding, will leave existing infrastructures in ill repair, will bring irreparable destruction and damage to our wildlife and environment, and put stress where stress is already there on our water sources, a lifeline to survival. And rural areas, they want to stay rural. Do not build these roads to ruin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Rubin. Up next is Roderick Jude from Coral Gables, Florida. Roderick, you are unmuted.
Yeah, hi, Rod Jude from Coral Gables, Florida. I'm a former member of the Miami-Dade County Planning Advisory Board for, served on that board for over 10 years and had a career in South Miami-Dade County in agriculture for 30 plus years. You know, this is one of the most horrendous development ploys I've ever seen forced on the citizens of the state of Florida. You know, it's embarrassing that something like this even got through the legislature and signed into law by the governor. Certainly not the will of the people. I haven't seen any editorials in favor of it anywhere. You know, it's just the worst kind of poor public policy. It's horrendous. You know, and if the statutory purpose includes revitalizing rural communities and enhancing the quality of life and protecting the environment and natural resources, you really have only one choice on your recommendations to the governor. And that recommendation would be a do not build recommendation. That can be the only choice you have. You know, if built, these new toll roads would be the nail in the coffin of what's left of Florida's last remaining rural lands and communities. It will be bad for our water, bad for wildlife, bad for our health, bad for taxpayers, bad for agriculture, and bad for rural communities, and bad for the climate. And I'm going to get you more details on each one of those in writing. But, you know, these roads will do nothing more than attract sprawl, make huge profits for special interests like landowners, developers, and rural road builders. These roads will not promote good growth management and land use planning. And, you know, I don't see how you can be in any of these. I do not see how there can be any consensus on this bad proposal. The only option is a do not build. You know, and also could say that, you know, in light of the current situation with the COVID virus and how it's spinning out of control in Florida, and you've heard this from other speakers, we really should put this thing off, you know, on your part. And at the same time, I think the legislature should clearly look at, you know, new legislation in the upcoming sessions to defund this whole thing and just put it to bed. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jude. Up next is Michael Hill. Michael, you are unmuted.
Hi, guys. Oh, hold on one second. Sorry about that. Give me a second. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir, we can. Go ahead.
So, I'm here today just to speak on behalf of the planet. Coming from Orlando, Florida initially, I have seen my farewell expansions of toll roads and roadways and what they can do. Now, unfortunately, with battling the Osceola County Expressway extension, I have noticed one thing is that the Expressway Authority down there with the expansion of the roadway has thrown complete caution to the wind in all disregards in regards to environment and the local community around. And so, unfortunately, I feel like as a citizen of Florida and as a taxpayer, $90 million for 3 roadways that are going to not only build more toll roads, because, you know, it seems like in Florida nowadays, we are nothing but toll roads. I mean, literally, we should be called the Sun Pass State instead of the Sunshine State at this point. I firmly want to believe that if this task force and MCORS is really about protecting the environment and revitalizing our communities, then if you are going to build this roadways, you need to give significant amount of your toll revenue to conservation within those areas. That is the only way that I personally think that even remotely letting these roads through, unless there is significant compensation to the communities abroad. Because, like everybody before me has previously stated, there is already established infrastructure in these areas done through U.S. highways. So the necessary needs for a toll road, absolutely, I mean, I don't see any kind of reason or any kind of need for these toll roads in this area initially. May I also mention too, that in what is being called the induced traffic myth, that a lot of Department of Transportations fail to even acknowledge, but adding more lanes for more traffic does not help traffic. And actually, if anything, it creates traffic problems even more. And I don't understand why all these people with these degrees in urban planning don't acknowledge this. Because and even before 7068 was passed and this thing was created, it even found that it's only going to alleviate 5 minutes of travel on I-75. I'm sorry, but personally to me, and anybody in the group here will tell you, $90 million to alleviate 5 minutes, that is not fiscally responsible. And this is coming from people who like to say they're fiscally responsible. Personally, I think the no build option is the only way that will alleviate all the stress on these communities. These communities are ruled for a reason, and they want to stay that way. Power to the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Up next is Luis Villarosa. Luis, you are unmuted.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yes. I'm a third-generation Floridian from Florida, and I've certainly witnessed the deterioration of the environment in my lifetime. I'll make one comment on broadband. I don't have the details on this, but I believe there's a company backed by Elon Musk, and we know what he can do, that wants to put a system of satellites out in the air that'll reach remote areas. So you don't have to have hardwired conduits to get to those areas. I believe that's the way the technology is moving, and certainly MCORS is not going to do that. It's not an efficient way of looking at technology in the future. Also, I've seen some communication from communities up in North Florida who certainly want to stay rural. I know Jefferson County had an issue with I-10, that it took traffic off, I think, US 19, and some of the businesses, local businesses, actually went downhill because the traffic was diverted from 19. Also, we are the third most populous state in the union. We have critical needs in terms of water. In the Tampa Bay area, we're under water restrictions right now. We need to control growth. We're having difficulty supplying the water needs of our existing population. Also, we cannot make a mistake in the corridor between Collier County and Polk County, because we make a mistake and we extinct the wild panther population, we will never recover for that. That's all I have to say for now, and I appreciate me allowing input.
Thank you, Mr. Villarosa, for your comment.
This concludes the public comment segment of the virtual meeting. Thank you to all the commenters for taking time and speaking about this very important topic. Public input is vital to the MCORS process. Public comments may be submitted at any time to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us and will become part of the public record. I would like to thank the task force members for participating and receiving public comments today, We will be bringing you a summary of all written comments received to date at your July task force meeting. Thank you again for joining us today. This concludes the virtual meeting.